Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leonida Odongo, and today I'll be talking about feminism at crossroads, realities of pastoralist communities in East Africa. I'd like to welcome you from whichever part of the world you're tuning in, and today you're going to be listening to those realities. What is pastoralism and pastoralists? In interrogating pasture farming, pastoralism is an activity of keeping livestock, and this involves migrating from one place to another in search of water and pasture. And a look at the East Africa region, you find that the arid and semi-arid areas of East Africa region are well suited for pastoralist activities. Pastoralist communities in East Africa include Maasai, who are found in Kenya and Tanzania. We have the Pokot, the Turkana. In Rwanda, we have the Tutsi, the Bahima, Karamojong, and Basongora. And all these communities depend on livestock as their source of livelihoods, as well as for cultural survival. Some of the pastoralist communities are found across borders. For example, we have the Maasai community, who are found in Kenya and in Tanzania. And for example, for the case of Maasai, they keep cattle, goats, and sheep. In looking at relevance of pasture farming in East Africa, one thing is that having worked with indigenous peoples, most of whom are pastoralists, makes this an important and relevant topic for me at personal level. I also believe that food is political and pasture farming is therefore political. Pastoralism is also important for economic purposes because the pastoralists derive their sources of livelihoods from pasture farming. For example, milk, meat, and hides. And sometimes there is the sale of the animals themselves, and the money is used to buy other things. For example, buy food, for instance, vegetables and other, pay for other services, for example, school fees. Pastoralism is also relevant because of social status. In pastoralist communities, the wealth is measured in the number of children and the number of cattle somebody has. And men who own more cattle, more livestock, are always given more respect and are included in discussions revolving around any issue. And of course, it's also a form of pride and prestige. And this still reinforces the social relevance of pastoralism. Still, with regards to the importance of from a statistical perspective, and giving an example, for instance, Uganda has a cattle corridor where 5 million pastoralists manage 45% of Uganda's cattle, 34% of the goats, 60% of the sheep, and 92% of the donkeys, as well as 98% of the camels. And all this, they get milk, meat, honey, beeswax, and skins. And of course, when we talk about the cultural significance of pastoralism, cattle is always used as dowry, and it's in other ceremonies, for example, initiation of boys, it can be used as awards and also exchanged as gifts between friends and families. So the cultural significance of pastoralism is a sign of respect and prestige. In Kenya, most parts of Kenya as a country, 80% of Kenya is is a landmass that is arid and semi-arid. And just to give examples, for instance, Baringo County is where we find the Pokot, who are indigenous people, but they are also pastoralists. And just to give other examples, we have the Turkana people who are found in Kenya. And sometimes they shift and go to neighboring countries such as Uganda to look for pasture. We also have the Karamojong still as a community that is pastoralist. And just to look at challenges that are found within pastoralist communities. One is the fact, just to look at feminism and also link that to pastoralist communities, you find that men are predominantly the owners of livestock, while less valuable elements such as chicken are associated or owned by women. Women in pastoralist communities, despite playing a very important role in terms of looking for water for the cattle, taking care of the family, you find that the bulk of the control lies with the men. Pastoralism is very, very crucial to pastoralist communities. And we've seen cases where people have lost lives when they're protecting their livestock. And we find that women are often regarded as caregivers. Their role is nurturing and caring for the young livestock before weaning, because these are the animals that are left at home as the others are taken for grazing. And when widowed, for example, because there are a lot of conflicts that take place in pastoralist communities because of competition over scarce resources such as pasture and water, you find that when the women are widowed, many a times they are not allowed to control either the land or the pasture. And the control is automatically goes to the hands of the male members of the family, and this can be the in-laws. And still, in terms of the realities of pastoralist communities, women undertake both productive and reproductive roles within the communities. So this particularly means that women have to undertake more work within the communities, and this is also a challenge because now they have to there's more work in terms of their engagement. And of course, we have to that this is mostly unpaid work. Other pastoralist realities, just looking at the existing realities, is the conflicts. And these conflicts are not only in one country, but sometimes you find that they cross borders. These conflicts sometimes force governments to try and control the lives of pastoralists. For example, forcing them to stay in one particular area as part of trying to address resource-based conflicts. There are often many conflicts that come around as a result of pastoralism. And this is part of different governments' initiatives aimed at controlling the pastoralists, because of the assumption that when the pastoralists are controlled or contained in one area, it's a way of addressing conflicts. In relation to feminism, feminism is about addressing the power struggles that exist amongst the genders. And in reality, women in particular go through various forms of oppressions, which are intersectional. For example, you find you are a woman, you are widowed, you have a disability, your land has been taken away, your livestock, you cannot control the livestock. Those are the intersectional elements. And pastoralist women often occupy community land, and the control of this land is often in the hands of men. And then we find that because the control of land is in the hands of men, pastoralist women tend to only have user rights and not control rights. User rights meaning that they can only utilize that land as long as they're given permission by the men. And of course, land for pasture is controlled by men, and also the power to make decisions on the land and the livestock is also in the hands of the men. And if you look at women, particularly in pastoralist communities, you can say that they're amongst the world's most marginalized women. If you look at East Africa, the pastoralist communities live in harsh terrains. These are affected by climate change, competition for pasture and water. And of course, there are also areas that are affected by political and economic marginalization. You find infrastructure such as roads are not there. When you talk about political marginalization, you find that many a times they don't have representatives in parliament, or they don't have the financial muscle to undertake a political campaign and get elected. And then you also find that with the control of livestock and land by men, that's also adds to another layer of oppression of pastoralist women. Specific to the challenges that are faced by pastoralist communities, and you find that climate change impacts does not choose, whether you're male or female. It's cross-cutting. But then you find that for women, they tend to have more worse impacts when you talk about climate change in comparison with the men. And then, for example, they have to take care of the sick animals. They have to fetch water. And sometimes when it is dry, they have to dig holes in order to get water from underground. And this takes a lot of their time. And all this, as they do all this, they're also supposed to be taking care of children. They're also supposed to be providing, undertaking domestic work in the household, for example, ensuring the house is clean, cooking for the family and things like that, and also nurturing the young children. And then, of course, women are also responsible for construction. You find that in some pastoralist communities, it's the women who are responsible for constructing houses. And so you find that they're also taking up a lot of more duties, a lot of work, which in most cases is normally not recognized or quantified when it comes to like giving it a monetary valuation. And then women are also responsible for caregiving, as well as they also get impacted on, for example, when new natural resources get discovered. You find that in most instances, there's often evictions, and with evictions, you find that it's women who get mostly affected. They have to make sure that the families are taken care of. If they have to go and live in an internally displaced persons, camp, the women who have to ensure that there is food for the families. And then, of course, the aspect of mobility, the seasonal mobility. Sometimes women are left behind as the men move around in looking after the cattle. And in many instances, you find that they are also subjected to a lot of violence. And sometimes you find that when, for instance, there is migration in order to in order to look for pasture, many a times you find that in the event that cattle are confiscated, you find that families get even poorer. And one incident is in Tanzania, where the late president of Tanzania ordered the confiscation of cattle, Maasai cattle, which had come from Kenya, saying that Tanzania is not grazing ground for cattle from Kenya. And in such incidences, you find that it's mostly women who tend to suffer, because when there is any loss in the family, it's also grounds for gender-based violence in some cases, especially when there is projections. And as already spoke about climate change, this is something that is affecting everybody the world over, and particularly for pastoralist communities, it gets even worse because one, they're already living in harsh conditions, harsh terrains, semi-arid and arid areas. And then with climate change impacts, you find that when there is excess flooding, livestock are lost when they get swept away by water. When there is drought, a prolonged drought, also there is death of livestock. And this makes the loss not just an economic issue, but also it becomes a mental health issue, particularly for pastoralist communities, because there is the interplay of cultural issues, cultural relevance, the social relevance in livestock. And so with climate change, when there's any loss, it has all those implications, but also it has mental health implications for these communities. And when, for example, there is a drought brought about by climate change, you find that women have to travel longer distances, particularly to look for water. And then they're not only looking for water for their domestic use, but they'll have to look for water for their animals as well. And in addition, this is something like the aspect of taking care of, the livestock, particularly sourcing for water, is something that is done through and through. It's something that is intergenerational. And of course, as climate change keeps worsening, it means that the burden of care for the livestock still falls on women and becomes even worse. And it means that women, particularly women and girls, are going to spend even more time in care roles, and sometimes they don't have even adequate time for themselves or time for rest. And if we look at some of the proposals in relation to a way forward, it's important to have advocacy to address retrogressive cultural practices. For example, when you talk about land ownership and the unpaid care work, it's about time the contribution of women is actually quantified within the household and the community. There is need for gender analysis, role plays, particularly during community dialogues. And this is, in the long run, is going to be part of a change of attitude, particularly towards the role of women in society. Then it's also important to work with local leaders to champion respect and appreciation for women's rights to land and other productive resources. Because you find that, for instance, when you're talking about land, the decision makers are often men, and the administration process, sometimes you find it's men who make those decisions. So that is why it's important to work with local leaders, because they wield a lot of power at the local levels when it comes to decision making about governance on natural resources that exist in communities. And in looking at the envisioned future, like where should we go or where should we move or what needs to happen, there's also need to avail targeted finance to pastoralist women to enhance their economic capacity. This is particularly important because when a woman goes to the bank, for example, she'll be asked for collateral, and if she doesn't have the title deed or access to it, or it's not in her name, then having access to a bank loan becomes very, very difficult. Then it's also important to generate recognition for pastoralist men, particularly who respect women's rights, and that can be through Pastoralist Male of the Year awards. I think this can be something that can garner a lot of support. Then land rights and gender equality and inclusion dialogues in the community through public forums, including Chief Baraza. Baraza is an open public forum that people can come together. And this is also something else can be through family meetings where you start having those conversations around the importance of land rights, because everything starts within the household before it cascades to the community. Then it's important to create platforms to enable decision making amongst pastoralist women, because sometimes you find that even in a sitting, you find that women sit differently, far away from the men. Sometimes you have women sit down when they are making, you cannot sit where, you cannot be equated to where men are. So women have to sit on the floor sometimes. And that's why now creating these platforms that enable decision making amongst pastoralist women becomes very important. First of all, to make them become more articulate and be able to voice the issues that are affecting them. And other things include targeted finance for pastoralist women. That one I already explained. And then, of course, the implementation of policies to better the lives of pastoralist communities. That is very, very important. We can have very good policies within the region, but then the enforcement aspect is very, very key in terms of realization of the rights of pastoralist communities. And then it's also important to engage men and boys in gender action, particularly because it's the boys who end up becoming the men of the future. And it's also important to enhance attitude change, particularly among men in relation to looking at ownership of the existing natural resources and giving space for women to also make decisions in this.